So what's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video, and today we're going to be going over another deck that existed really not that long ago, even though that the deck date of this is 6 years old, kind of dating me here a little bit, but way back when in Modern, we've had plenty of decks that kind of reign over the format. They have, their lion's share of the meta game, and then they just kind of fall off the face of the earth. And we kind of went over a deck like that. We went over the Selesnya Heliod combo deck back in December, which if you have not seen that video already, I implore you to do so because this deck is going to be kind of on the polar opposite of that. In the sense that the Heliod deck you could still go and play right now in Modern, as you see the list on in the video and everything like that. Obviously, you can make your own tweaks, adjustments, whatever, to make it playable if you want to try to play it. Red Black Hollow One, for the time that this deck was popular and was its most played, has one crucial card that is not legal in it, but the rest of the cards, to my knowledge, are legal in the format. There's this card called Faithless Looting, does not exist in Modern anymore. It completely banned off the face of the earth, and for good reason, because it made essentially the Blue-Red Phoenix decks like super broken and like very early versions of the uh, weird guy that, of course, I can't bring up Hogak. That's the card because I can never remember the names of cards until it's absolutely necessary or important. So Red Black Hollow one, we'll go over real quick, and then we'll kind of theorize like essentially why it kind of dropped off the face of the earth. Of course, if you have not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos like this, you want to see me going over different modern decks that you can actually play in the format, Pioneer, etc., so on and so forth, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell, as that is an easy and free way to support me and my channel. And of course, I just love talking about Magic and stuff, so it just keeps me talking about Magic, which is great and fantastic. So, Red Black Hollow one, essentially the easiest way to put it, was this super aggressive deck that could just get free wins a number of ways. So one of the ways is getting a bunch of these card Hollow One into play. Hollow One costs 2 less to catch for each card that you've cycled or discarded this turn. Now it doesn't care how the card's discarded, whether it's you getting discarded from like a Thoughtseize, or from these cards like Burning Inquiry, Faithless Looting, and then Goblin Lore as it kind of came, later in iterations of Hollowed One when they lost Faithless Looting. So essentially, Burning Inquiry, Goblin Lore, whatever, they say that each player draws 3 cards and discard 3 cards at random, except for Goblin Lore. Goblin Lore is 2 mana, and you draw 4 cards, discard 3 cards at random. Essentially, this was like step one. Burning Inquiry did 2 things. It made Hollow Ones free because you were going to discard 3 cards, which means that Hollow Ones would have cost 6 less to cast, and Hollow One is a 5 mana 4/4. Also, Burning Inquiry could just force your opponent to discard the lands in their hand. So there was a number of times where you Burning Inquiry and you got to put 2 Hollow Ones into play, and your opponent had no lands in hand. So you put a power into play on turn one, and your opponent just has no way of interacting with it. And at the time, Fatal Push was one of the most popular forms of removal. You had people playing like Path to Exile, but it really wasn't as popular as like Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push were in the format. So to keep that in mind for like the context of like when we're actually looking at this deck list, like that was some of the most popular removal to play in the format. Some people play like odd copies of like Go for the Throat. You had people playing Dismember, which most of the time people were using Dismember in like the Death Shadow decks. They're paying 4 life to cast that card. You had like Tron that was playing it as well, and some of the other like Eldrazi Tron decks and things like that, and different Eldrazi variants and stuff. So really, like your opponent was essentially taking a hit from a Hollow One to get rid of a Hollow One, and also spending a card to do so. So that's like one part of like the Hollow One deck, and what made it really powerful is that it did create some non-games, even if your opponent like mulliganed to a hand where they can interact. And it only got worse if they mulliganed past 7 cards. They go down to 6, 5, whatever. Just more of a chance that like they're going to have a hand that just does not function. Also, the fact that you were putting cards in your graveyard means that you could play some sort of a graveyard package. One of the popular ones being Flamewake Phoenix, which if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you could pay a red, return to the battlefield. You had blood gas, so whenever you played lands, you would get these cards back. You know, you get a blood gas back, and the fact that you are a fairly aggressive deck, Modern is also a format where, Death Shadow was very popular at the time. You could also get back like hasty blood gas and put a lot of pressure on your opponent's life total, especially if you're getting back 2-3 blood gas. Flameblade Adept got bigger whenever you cycle or discarded a card, so there were some games where like you could play a Flameblade Adept onto like turn one, and then put like two Hollow Ones into play, hit your opponent for four, and then like future inquiries, Faithless Lootings, and things like that kind of sped up the clock from the Flameblade Adept, and also the fact that it had to be blocked by two creatures means that it was probably going to end up like 2-for-1ing your opponent at some point, while also getting you forward your game plan as well. Going back to the Flame Lake Phoenix, obviously Hollow Ones are able to trigger it as 4 power. You also have these three Gurmag Angler and Tombstalker, essentially being like a 1 mana 5/5 and a 2 mana 5/5 with flying that could also trigger the Flame Wake Phoenix. So very aggressive. Honest, like even though the mana costs seem very high, very low to the ground, all things considered. Uh, you go and get past like all the creatures. You go to like the spells and stuff. You were playing like Lightning Bolt and Fiery Temper. These were just ways to essentially put more pressure on your opponent. You're playing 8 Lightning Bolts in the deck, which again, in a format like dominated by like Death Shadow and these decks that really didn't necessarily care about their life total and were willing to kind of go pretty low to play, on curve as possible. This deck could punish that by essentially getting to like Burning Inquiry on turn two, make a giant Flameblade Adept, put maybe a Hollow one or two into play, cast a Grimag Angler, whatever, but then be able to Fiery Temper your opponent and hold on to like some Lightning Bolts and things like that. Even just getting to like set it up with like a Telegraph, like Faithless Looting or whatever, to like discard two Fiery Tempers, dome your opponent for six, and still be able to play like a Gurmag Angler or like a Tombstalker or something like that at other points in the game as well. Called in the Netherworld, you could return a black creature from your graveyard to your hand. Essentially, you could do like a Street Wraith if you're like a card short from getting free hollowed ones. You could get back like Gurmag Angler or Tombstalker to then put it into play. A lot of decks at the time had a very hard time dealing with a 5/5 flyer. It was just probably one of the biggest things you could play. This is before Murktide, so while Murktide definitely has the ability to be a 2 mana 8/8, Tombstalker just being a 2 mana 5/5 a lot of the time was pretty good. Didn't see too much play. I know I experimented with like one or two copies in like Death Shadow way back when, and I liked playing it, but for like that deck in particular, really wasn't that great. But just as being a way that can close out the game very quickly, especially when they have to deal with like your other big idiots that are just coming up the ground. Tombstalker is just kind of a nice addition as one of in like this sort of deck. The mana base was super simple. None of these channel lands that y'all kids had nowadays. You have Cliffs, Blood Crypt. This deck could kind of just play loosey goosey with its own life total, just because again, it's going to want to like play these on like turn one, turn two. Hopefully, only operate on like 2 or 3 lands, and then just be able to get rid of the rest with like Faithless Looting and Burning Inquiries, and just have all gas from that point. Um, Sideboard just kind of more relevant for like the time that this deck was popular, more so than anything else. So, why exactly can't Modern Hollowed One exist? So a few reasons. The discard packages and stuff, like the self discard packages and stuff, kind of revolves around like Asmo at this point. It's about getting a Underworld cookbook with Asmo. You end up, getting the Oval Chase Daredevil, and then you're able to just make a ton of food. You hose essentially all the creature decks, and depending on who you are, you kind of fold to like some of the graveyard decks. You kind of don't. It just depends, honestly. So really playing a dedicated package like this, you know, isn't all that great. And after Faithless Looting got banned, as I alluded to earlier, Goblin Lore took its place, and that version of Hollow One also did very well. And you also got to play like Vengevines, and now at this point with Modern Horizons 2, you could play Blazing Rootwalla to essentially have an increased chance of getting back Vengevines and things like that. But in a format where endurance is legal and like all these pitch elementals and how fast and how grindy and how interactive some of the games are really, and just the fact that removal has gotten better in the format in terms of, Unholy Heat, while I think on the downswing definitely kind of dominates a lot of what this deck was good against. Again, the popular removal in the format was people playing Fatal Push, was playing Lightning Bolt, and things like that. And sometimes you'd have the occasional Lightning Axe floating around, especially when you get into like the blue-red Phoenix decks and things like that. But by and large, Lightning Axe has, its niche cases in some decks in the modern format, so that card's not played right now. But Unholy Heat really has like no drawback. Like for dealing 2 damage for 1 mana in the early turns, deals with a lot of early game threats, and getting to deal 6 later in the game is more than good enough. Especially when people can get Delirium on like turn 2 or turn 3 as well. So a lot of the time it is just a deal 6, and dealing 6 deals a lot with the cards they have here. And when you want to be playing with the graveyard, if we're in this theoretical like Vengevine package that we're um, playing like a Gurmag Angler or like a Tombstalker hurts a lot when it gets unholy heated. Just for 1 mana, boom, get rid of your thing. You're not really allowed, really can play with the Delirium cards effectively, and a lot of them are so good. You probably end up being some sort of Ragavan deck because you are playing red, but then you really don't want Ragavan because you want to be able to cast Burning Inquiries and stuff like that. It's just a lot of, I think, where the format has shifted. Hollowed One doesn't really fit into that bill, and while you can Burning Inquiry on turn 1 and kind of screw over your opponent, especially with the mulligan rule now, and I think people being more aggressively leaning on like their mulligans and situations and things like that, to the point where like you have people going to 5 or 6 cards to have hands that are probably like on the nuttier side of like those 5 and 6 cards that Burning Inquiry on turn 1, could just result in like a free win. But again, that being said, your opponent is able to just come back with like 1 land and an Unholy Heat, things like that, or just even finding like a red card for their Fury or a white card for their Solitude, things like that. All cards that are very popular to play in the format end up dealing with like the 1 or 2 threats that you end up putting into play. Then you essentially have nothing going on, and all of your cards aren't necessarily card advantage. They trade evenly with the cards that you have. I think Burning Inquiry, you're actually down a card, where Goblin Lore, you actually break even. So really, it's just doesn't end up being in your favor. So all in all, that's kind of like my reasons to why I think Hollow One is going to have a really hard time actually, regaining the spotlight that I had in Modern about 5 years, over 5.5 years ago at this point. Essentially, there's just better options for this self discard strategy. And again, we've seen it ever since like Modern Horizons 2, where like Asmo has been on the forefront of that, and honestly, I would expect her to continue to be on that path for the fact of how powerful she is against the majority of the creatures that are available in the format. That just playing Hollow One, and then again this theoretical like Vengevine, Blazing Root Walla, like kind of stack up on like the free spells and like the big mana cost, but really only cost 1 mana creatures and stuff. So that is going to do it for Rakdos Red Black Modern Hollowed One for Modern. Of course, if you want to see videos like this where I kind of go over older Modern decks, explain what they do, why they don't exist, blah, blah, etc., kind of like what I did with this video or with the Selesnya uh, Heliod combo deck. Of course, that's what it is. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Comment down below maybe another deck that you want to see, kind of like explain, go over, etc. And of course, subscribe to my channel, ring the notification bell, because it is a free and easy way of supporting my content. And of course, I love talking about Magic. I just literally talked about a deck that does not exist in Modern anymore because one, of it brings back a lot of good memories, and two, I just enjoy talking about Magic and kind of the history of the game as well, especially Modern and stuff like that. So please, please, please consider subscribing to the channel. Ring the notification bell so you know when I post videos and stuff. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.